Chapter 1. The ticking of Cumbria. The air inside the ballroom of the Vance estate in Cumbria was stifling, almost to the point of suffocation, though outside, the winds of the Atlantic Ocean howled relentlessly against the sheer cliffs. The first winter blizzard was sweeping in, hurling icy hail against the grand Gothic arched windows of the manor, creating eerie sounds like the wailing of abandoned souls. Cumbria was wild and cold, a region of rugged cliffs and stormy seas that had long bred a sturdy, unyielding people. Yet tonight, inside the grand hall of the Vance family, the atmosphere was hot with splendor and hypocrisy. This was the bride selection ball hosted by Lord Percival, who sought to display his newfound influence and wealth. The local nobility had gathered in full force, eager to catch a glimpse of the drama unfolding. Their satin gowns of brilliant blue, emerald green, and soft pink shimmered in the light, and their expensive tailcoats glided back and forth under the light of hundreds of beeswax candles, casting long, elegant shadows across the polished floorboards. Conversations flowed like wine, filled with light gossip about the latest fashions of Mayfair and the scandalous rumors surrounding the peerage. They raised crystal glasses, filled with fine sherry, toast to one another, and gossiped excitedly about the dark return of the reigning Duke Arthur, who had just survived the Spanish campaigns and was rumored to be deeply scarred, both physically and mentally. Yet amidst that grandeur and luxury, a corner of the ballroom was falling into chaos due to a cruel, public humiliation. Before setting foot in this magnificent estate, Genevieve had been forced to walk a grueling 2 miles through the biting snow from the small coastal town of Cumbria. Her old leather boots were completely soaked with freezing water, and her breath materialized into white clouds that vanished rapidly in the howling gale. She remembered her father's small watchmaker shop, which had once been filled with the cheerful, comforting ticking of clocks and the warm scent of polished ochre shop that Lord Percival had brutally sealed under the guise of debt collection. She remembered the hollow cheeks of her father before he passed away on a rainy night, leaving her nothing but the golden gold key and mysteries yet unsolved. The path leading to the Vance estate was steep and slippery, but she had never once entertained the thought of turning back. She needed to confront the man who had indirectly ruined her family's life. When she stepped across the grand stone threshold of the manor, the sheer luxury and opulence struck her, but she felt only a freezing hypocrisy enveloping the air. Genevieve remembered the morning she packed her tools. Old Thomas, the local blacksmith who had been a loyal friend of her father, had helped her load her heavy wooden box onto the wagon. "Watch your back, lass," he had warned, his eyes full of concern. "Lord Percival is a man who devours those smaller than him. He will not hesitate to crush you if you stand in his way." She had thanked him, keeping her chin high. She knew the risks, but the memory of her father's unjust bankruptcy and sudden, suspicious death was a flame that burned constantly in her soul, pushing her forward through the freezing Cumbria winds. Genevieve stood at the center of those contemptuous and mocking stares. She knew she was out of place among these haughty ladies in their lavishly embroidered gowns and gentlemen in polished leather shoes. But she maintained the proud stance of a true artisan, one who understood the exact value of her own labor. She wore a simple gown of coarse gray wool, old and frayed at the hem and cuffs, her golden hair braided neatly at the nape of her neck with a simple wooden pin, entirely without a single diamond or pearl to adorn her. Her hands, which were accustomed to micro-tweezers and delicate brass gears, were now stained with a faint trace of dark machine grease. On the display table covered in red velvet before her lay the antique brass pendulum clock of the Vance family, partially disassembled. Lord Percival, a middle-aged man with a bloated face, cunning eyes, and a portly belly squeezed tightly into a gold-embroidered waistcoat, was pointing a finger covered in jade rings directly at her face. His voice rose in indignation, ensuring that everyone in the ballroom could hear. "The daughter of a bankrupt watchmaker, a filthy thief. I showed you mercy, kindness, by letting you set foot in this estate to repair our family heirloom, and yet you dare play your wicked tricks and steal the pink rubies that protect the gear shafts of this antique pendulum clock. Do you have any idea that the value of those rubies is worth more than your wretched life? You are indeed of a low breed, like father, like daughter, utterly shameless. Your father was nothing but a humble, bankrupt watchmaker who died in a miserable corner, and you are no different." The whispers of the crowd grew louder, filled with disgust and amusement. The ladies hid behind their fans, whispering cruel remarks to one another. They took pleasure in seeing a common worker's dignity crushed in public. Genevieve did not shed a single tear. Her clear blue eyes looked directly at Lord Percival, her slender shoulders held perfectly straight, showing no sign of fear or submission. She thought of her late father, an honest master craftsman who had taught her that the honor of an artisan lay in the precision and honesty of the machine they built. She drew a deep breath to calm her racing heart, then spoke. Her voice was clear, resonant, and low, cutting through the laughter of the assembly. Lord Percival, before you accuse me of theft, you should examine the design of this pendulum clock. This clock was built in 1785 by my father, Master Artisan Sterling. The gear shafts of this model are not held in place by rubies, but by hardened steel bushings. There were never any rubies in this clock to begin with. You accuse me of stealing what never existed, merely to create a pretext for my arrest, and to cover up the fact that you have not paid the local craftsman. Genevieve took a step forward, pointing directly at the pocket watch Lord Percival was wearing in his waistcoat pocket, just like the watch you are wearing. The gold regulator gear inside is engraved with the signature of my father, Master Artisan Sterling. This is the watch my father made specifically for you 10 years ago. But its escape wheel has been brutally destroyed by the clumsy pliers of an amateur. You slander me as a thief of family jewels, yet you yourself are wearing a piece with cheap, swapped components, trying to accuse me before the nobility to hide your own embezzlement. Lord Percival turned pale as he was exposed directly before the entire room. His arrogance turned into a furious rage as he noticed the surrounding guests whispering and looking at him. He became so enraged that his face flushed red and he raised his fat arm, intending to strike Genevieve across the face. You dare slander a nobleman. I will have you thrown into the Cumbria prison immediately to teach you how to remain silent. But before his fat hand could touch her, a heavy cane with a silver lion's head struck his wrist with a sharp, cracking sound. Lord Percival cried out in pain, backing away as he clutched his bruised wrist. A tall man stepped into the room. He wore a dark military cloak covered with cold snow, his broad shoulders imposing, and his sharp, angular face looked as if it were carved from cold marble. One of his arms was lightly bandaged beneath his coat, but the aura of authority, detachment, and coldness he radiated made it so no one dared look him in the eyes. This was Arthur, the Duke of Ravenscroft, the notorious silent Duke of the English peerage, renowned for his coldness and ruthlessness on the battlefields of Spain. He had just returned from the grueling campaigns, bearing physical Salamanca wounds and invisible scars upon his soul. Arthur walked slowly toward the display table. The sound of his leather boots neighing down on the stone floor echoed in the silent hall. He stopped 3 paces from Genevieve, his sharp gray eyes cutting through the air like a blade as he looked her over from head to toe, then paused on the disassembled clock. Lord Percival, Arthur spoke, his voice low and raspy, yet it carried an absolute authority that chilled the room. Since when does the representative of the Vance family resort to striking a woman to cover his own ignorance? The young woman is correct. This pendulum clock never utilized rubies. My grandfather's records in the estate registry confirm that the gear shafts were always constructed of hardened steel. Arthur did not look at Lord Percival. He removed his black leather gloves, tossing them onto the table, and picked up the gold gear Genevieve had pointed out. He turned it slightly under the candlelight, and saw the tiny letter S, finely engraved with micro-mechanical precision that only Master Artisan Sterling could perform. He looked at Genevieve, whose blue eyes did not waver from his cold gaze. Arthur Kutsalm Cheman Khan Langt Lung Vang Doi Kup Sang Tiak, Lord Percival, your guest list is far too crowded with loud fools. And your accounting books seem to contain many discrepancies. I suggest you retire to your quarters before I order my guards to examine the estate records. As for you, Miss Sterling, I have a proposal for you. Lord Percival stood speechless, sweat breaking out on his forehead under Arthur's freezing gaze. He did not dare argue with the reigning duke, who held absolute power. Arthur turned to Genevieve, his voice softening slightly but retaining its solemnity. Miss Sterling, can you repair the great pendulum clock, the Chrono Sentinel at Ravenscroft Castle? Genevieve looked directly into the eyes of the formidable duke. If I have the proper tools of my father and the necessary quiet, I can make it function and strike the hours once more, your grace. But I require absolute access without the interference of anyone. Arthur nodded slowly. You shall have it. Pack your tools, we depart tonight. Chapter 2. The contract of time. The carriage bearing the falcon crest of the Vance family traveled swiftly along the rugged, snow-covered country road, heading toward the ancient stone fortress of Ravenscroft Castle. Inside the cabin, a stifling silence reigned, almost to the point of suffocation. The winter blizzard outside began to howl with a feral fury, throwing sharp white snow against the glass windows of the carriage, obscuring the bleak and desolate Cumbrian hills outside. Genevieve sat directly opposite Duke Arthur. She gazed out of the frost-rimmed window, acutely aware of the heavy tension that filled the space between them. She knew she had just entered a highly dangerous game of power. Lord Percival would certainly not leave her in peace, after she had publicly exposed his corruption at the ball, and the fact that she held the golden gold key to the Chronos Sentinel. The sole relic her father had left before his suspicious death made her a direct threat to their ambitions. The steady clatter of the horses' hooves on the frozen stone road, and the howling northerly wind whistling through the cracks of the carriage door, created a monotonous, melancholy rhythm. Arthur sat leaning back against the dark leather upholstery, his sharp face partially concealed in the deep shadows cast by his wide-brimmed hat. The old battle Salamanca wound on his left shoulder seemed to be aching intensely under the Cumbrian cold. He closed his gray eyes slightly, his jaw tightening as he controlled the physical pain, without allowing a single outward expression to slip past his cold demeanor. Genevieve observed him quietly, sensing the invisible, crushing weight of responsibility that lay upon the shoulders of this young duke. He was not only fighting his enemies on the battlefields of Spain, he was now forced to wage a silent war against the traitors within his own family, to protect the legacy of his ancestors. Ravenscroft Castle was not merely a grand estate. It was the ultimate symbol of the honor and survival of the Vance line, which he had sworn to protect at all costs. Arthur broke the heavy silence with his low, raspy voice, his searching gray eyes looking directly at her, without the slightest hesitation. "Miss Sterling, let us be entirely frank with one another. I know you are no ordinary watchmaker, and you are well aware of the reason I took you away from Percival's ball tonight." Genevieve looked intently at the bandaged shoulder of the Duke through his heavy military cloak. She asked quietly, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity, "How were you Salamanca wounded at Salamanca?" "Your Grace?" Arthur paused, his gaze drifting toward a distant memory of smoke, gunpowder and blood that had once stained the plains of Spain. He answered in a low, gravelly tone. "It was a bright afternoon. My regiment was surrounded by French cavalry, due to a critical delay in the transmission of orders from the High Command. All our timepieces had failed, clogged by the dry dust of the battlefield. The lack of temporal precision was paid for with the lives of 50 brave soldiers. Since that day I have understood that time is not merely a sequence of numbers. It is life itself, the very boundary between survival and death." Genevieve turned her eyes back to him, her voice calm and steady. "You brought me with you because you require the golden gold key left by my father to unlock the Chronos Sentinel." Arthur nodded slowly, his face devoid of emotion under the dim light of the oil lamp hanging inside the carriage. "Indeed, my uncle Lord Percival is attempting to seize control of Ravenscroft through a forged will witnessed by the corrupt watchmaker Silas. The genuine will of my late father is locked inside the secret cryptographic compartment of the Chronos Sentinel. That clock stopped running exactly 15 years ago, immediately following my father's sudden and suspicious death. It was built with a highly secure chemical self-destruct mechanism. If anyone attempts to force it open with violence or inputs the incorrect cryptographic sequence, a delicate glass vial containing concentrated acid will immediately shatter. The acid will instantly oxidize the secret ink on the original will, destroying the document forever and leaving nothing but a blank, legally useless parchment. Only your father, and now his rightful heir, possess the knowledge to unlock the compartment without destroying the late Duke's original will. If my uncle presents his forged will, and the 15-year limitation period expires at the end of this London season, Ravenscroft will entail to him by law, and you wish for me to decrypt it to save your estate and title?" Genevieve asked. "I have a proposal for you," Arthur said, his gray eyes gleaming like polished steel in the dim lamplight. "I wish to employ you as the master watchmaker in residence of Ravenscroft Castle. You will be provided with private quarters in the West Tower, a dedicated private and secured mechanical room, and all the tools of your father, which I have recovered from his old workshop. I will pay you a handsome wage of £200 a year, guarantee your absolute safety from any legal harassment from my uncle, and assist you in uncovering the truth behind your father's death. In return, your sole duty is to repair the Chronos Sentinel and successfully decrypt the late Duke's original will before the end of the London season. This is a fair and honorable agreement." Genevieve looked at the service contract document. She read every legal clause carefully. Everything was clear, professional, and entirely respectful of her independence and personal dignity. She knew this was her only chance to protect her life from Lord Percival's wrath, while securing the resources to investigate her father's suspicious death. She took the quill, dipped it in ink, and signed her name clearly at the bottom, Genevieve. Arthur looked at her delicate but firm handwriting, nodding quietly. "Welcome to Ravenscroft, Miss Sterling. From this moment forth you are the master watchmaker in residence of my estate. We shall face our enemies together. The carriage turned through the grand stone gates of Ravenscroft Castle, the ancient grey stone walls and Gothic towers rising through the freezing winter blizzard, marking the beginning of a journey filled with storms and untold secrets. In her heart, Genevieve resolved that she would not allow herself to be drawn into the political intrigues of the peerage. She was merely an artisan, and her only goal was to find the truth behind her father's death and restore the honor of the sterling name. Yet as she looked at the cold, scarred profile of the Duke beside her, she realized this struggle would be far more intricate and dangerous than she had ever anticipated. The freezing wind howling outside the carriage windows seemed to echo as a warning of the storms that awaited her behind the grey stone walls. Chapter 3. The mechanical room. Ravenscroft Castle was far more vast and foreboding than Genevieve had ever imagined. Its long, draughty corridors were paved with cold granite, and the solemn portraits of past Dukes of Ravenscroft stared down from the high, dark-paneled walls. From the moment she arrived, the servants of the castle looked upon Genevieve with deep suspicion and quiet disdain. Whispers had already spread through the household about the low-born watchmaker girl, whom the Duke had personally brought back from Cumbria and placed in the West Tower. The old butler, Mr. Brooks, received her with standard, distant formality, showing none of the warmth or genuine respect reserved for guests of the peerage. However, Genevieve paid no heed to their cold stares. The only matter that occupied her mind was the Chronos Sentinel. When Genevieve first entered the grand kitchen of the castle to fetch some hot water, the kitchen maids and scullions immediately halted their tasks, whispering and casting critical glances at her. Mrs. Potts, the stern, stout cook in her spotless white apron, looked at Genevieve's frayed grey wool dress and let out a quiet sigh. However, when Genevieve noticed the pinewood pendulum clock hanging on the kitchen wall, the clock used to time the baking of the bread was stuck. Emitting a harsh, scraping sound, she did not hesitate to step forward. She took a small hairpin, bent it skillfully, and inserted it into the main gear train, clearing away the hardened old grease before adjusting the escapement. Within 5 minutes, the clock was running smoothly, striking the hours with a clear, resonant chime. Mrs. Potts watched her in utter astonishment, her cold demeanor vanishing instantly, replaced by a genuine respect for the girl's mechanical genius. From that moment on, the kitchen staff made sure to prepare the warmest meals and the finest tea for Miss Sterling. She was escorted to the private and secured mechanical room, situated at the top of the West Tower. This room had once served as her father's private workshop whenever he was commissioned to work at Ravenscroft. The space was filled with wooden shelves holding hundreds of glass vials containing various lubricating oils, micro-tweezers made of brass, and detailed design blueprints on yellowed parchment. In the corner of the room, the miniature forge used for casting small gears still bore the faint traces of old soot. The room carried the familiar, nostalgic sense of machine oil, aged oak, and dry paper, making Genevieve feel as though her father were still present, standing beside the workbench and smiling as he guided her through the assembly. Standing at the center of the room was the massive timepiece, the Chronos Sentinel. It had been constructed in 1792 by her father upon the commission of Arthur's grandfather, to commemorate the family's victory over the French fleet. The clock stood over 3 meters high, its frame crafted from dark Cumbrian oak that had been treated to resist moisture for 10 years, and its gears cast from gold-plated brass of exquisite quality. It possessed over 400 independent moving parts, displaying not only the hours and minutes but also the lunar phases, the positions of the zodiac constellations, and the seasonal changes of the year. It stood silent, cold, and imposing, casting a long shadow across the room as the grey winter light filtered through the Gothic arched window overlooking the windy valley. Genevieve stepped closer, her hand gently brushing against the old oak casing. She closed her eyes, listening intently. The clock was entirely silent, devoid of the comforting, steady ticking she knew so well. She opened her leather toolbox, affixed a small loop to her eye, and began to inspect the internal gears. She discovered a disturbing detail. The 12th gear, the regulator wheel that controlled the power transmission to the cryptographic compartment, had been brutally removed. The surrounding brass plates bore deep scratches, indicating that Silas had attempted to force the mechanism with iron tools but had failed, luckily without shattering the delicate acid vial of the security safeguard. She spent the entire day in the West Tower, neglecting food and rest. She cleared the dust from the delicate gear teeth, applying whale oil to lubricate the tiny steel pivots. She carefully sketched the layout of every gear train. To win the trust of the household, she did not hesitate to help the servants. In addition to her mechanical duties, she spent her sparse free time talking with, sharing knowledge with, and helping the younger maids organize the measurement tools around the castle. Genevieve's patience, humility, and exceptional talent quickly began to dismantle the wall of prejudice held by the downstairs staff. They began to view her with genuine respect, no longer seeing her as a low-born interloper. While cleaning a corner of her father's old workbench in the private and secured mechanical room, she found a scrap of old parchment wedged deep inside a hidden drawer. On it was her father's familiar handwriting addressed to the late Duke. "I have completed the Chronos Sentinel. The will is securely locked, but I fear that Lord Percival has begun to suspect and watch my movements. He has bribed Silas, my former apprentice. He seeks to steal the gold key." The paper was torn in half, but it was absolute proof that Lord Percival was the mastermind behind her father's death and the conspiracy to seize Ravenscroft. Genevieve clenched the parchment tightly, her blue eyes burning with a fierce resolve for justice. She would not allow the villains to succeed. She stood in silence before the massive clock, feeling the weight of time and the solemn duty laid upon her. She had to repair this clock, not only for her agreement with Arthur, but for the soul of her father who had left his legacy in her hands. Mr. Brooks knocked on the door of the private and secured mechanical room in the late afternoon, carrying a tray of hot tea. Seeing Genevieve working diligently under the oil lamp, he let out a quiet sigh of respect. "Miss Sterling, the Duke has instructed that you are to have access to any materials or components you require. Ravenscroft will provide everything to support your work. His Grace also reminds you to rest. The Cumbrian cold is unforgiving at night." Genevieve smiled in return. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Please convey my thanks to the Duke. I am making good progress. The mechanism is complex, but my father left wonderful clues." The old butler bowed and retired, thinking to himself that this young woman possessed a dignity and grace that was truly exceptional. Chapter 4: A Silent Dinner. As night fell, the grand dining hall of Ravenscroft Castle was enveloped in a cold, solemn atmosphere. The polished oak dining table, 12 meters in length, sat in the center of the room with only 2 occupants sitting at opposite ends. The candlelight from the silver candelabra flickered, yet it was insufficient to dispel the shadows of the vast room, its high walls hung with ancient tapestries. The sharp clatter of silver cutlery against fine porcelain echoed in the silence, emphasizing the deep distance between them. The footmen moved silently like ghosts, pouring wine and serving dishes without making a single sound. Arthur sat at the head of the table, eating in silence, his face expressionless in the dim light. The old Salamanca wound on his injured shoulder, flinched occasionally, causing him to set down his knife and tighten his jaw to endure the sudden, sharp pain. Genevieve observed him from the opposite end. She recognized the profound solitude and the immense burden laid upon the young Duke. He was forced to manage the entire estate, defend against enemies within his own house, and endure the physical pain of his Salamanca battle, Salamanca wound without a single word of complaint or seeking comfort from anyone. He carried the future of the entire estate and the livelihood of hundreds of tenants upon his shoulders. Genevieve set down her crystal glass, breaking the silence with her warm, steady voice. "Your shoulder is paining you again, is it not, Your Grace?" The fire from the massive hearth danced across the old portraits on the walls, casting long, eerie shadows. The dinner had proceeded in absolute silence, save for the wind howling outside the windows and the crackling of dry pine logs. Arthur seemed to be lost in the dark memories of the Iberian campaigns. The brutal Battle of Salamanca had claimed many of his men and left a deep scar on his left shoulder, a Salamanca wound that flared with pain whenever the Cumbrian winter set in. He looked at the young woman, sitting at the far end of the table. She wore a simple, clean dress, her posture natural and free of the false affectations common among the ladies of Mayfair. She looked at him with warm, transparent eyes filled with quiet understanding. Arthur paused, looking at her with a searching gaze before answering coldly. "It is of no consequence, Miss Sterling, merely an old reminder of Salamanca when the Cumbrian weather turns cold. I have long since learned to live with it. A soldier on the battlefield has no leisure to complain of his Salamanca wounds. My father always said that the human body is much like a complex mechanical clock," Genevieve said softly, her eyes meeting his with steady resolve. "If a single gear shaft is damaged and left neglected, the entire transmission system will be overloaded and quickly wear down. Your Salamanca wound is the same. If you choose to ignore it, the pain will eventually ruin your health." The pain in Arthur's shoulders seemed to intensify as the wind outside grew stronger, yet the quiet, genuine warmth of her concern offered an invisible soothing comfort. "I have brought with me a herbal oil that my father prepared from pine resin and lavender. It is highly effective in soothing muscle and joint pain. If you do not object, I can prepare it for you tonight." Arthur looked at her, his gray eyes narrowing slightly. He was accustomed to noble ladies who either showed fear of him or sought to flatter him with empty words. But Genevieve looked at him with an honest, practical concern born of an educated artisan. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Genevieve, I shall try it." The tension between them seemed to ease slightly after dinner. When Genevieve returned to her quarters, she found Mr. Brooks waiting at the door. He bowed lower than before, his voice carrying genuine respect. "Miss Sterling, the Duke has instructed that your workspace be moved to the chamber adjacent to the private and secured mechanical room for your protection. And I have prepared the herbal oil as you requested. Thank you for your care regarding His Grace's health." Genevieve smiled gently, knowing she had begun to win the trust of the most loyal servants in the castle through her sincerity. At that moment, a loud and urgent pounding resounded from the main gates of the castle, shattering the silence of the Cumbrian winter night. Mr. Brooks ran back to the West Tower, his face pale with anxiety. "Your Grace?" "The Cumbria Sheriff and a squad of armed constables are at the main gates. They bear an emergency arrest warrant signed by the local magistrate, acting upon a formal complaint filed by Lord Percival, accusing Miss Genevieve of grand theft of the family heirlooms." Arthur frowned, his gray eyes flashing with a freezing, lethal calm. He stood up, using his cane to walk swiftly down to the grand entrance hall, with Genevieve and Brooks following closely behind. In the cold stone hall, the Cumbria Sheriff stood with 4 armed constables. Upon seeing Arthur, the sheriff bowed respectfully but maintained a firm tone. "Good evening, Duke Ravenscroft. We are bound by the law to execute this warrant. Lord Percival accuses this young woman of stealing the gold key to the Chronos Sentinel and several precious jewels from the Cumbrian estate. Unless she is a member of the House of Ravenscroft, or protected directly by marriage entailment, we are legally required to take her into custody and transport her to the Cumbria jail immediately." Arthur looked at the sheriff with a commanding, authoritative gaze. "Sheriff, you have arrived a step too late. Miss Genevieve is neither a thief nor a stranger to this house. She is my betrothed, and we are preparing to sign our legally binding marriage settlement contract." With that, Arthur signaled Mr. Brooks to bring the mahogany box from his private study. He opened the box, retrieving the prepared marriage settlement document. Arthur looked directly into Genevieve's eyes, his voice low but filled with absolute determination. "Sign the document, Genevieve. Become the Duchess of Ravenscroft. This is the only legal shield I can offer to protect you from Percival's machinations." Genevieve understood the gravity of the situation. If she were thrown into the Cumbria prison, she would never have the opportunity to clear her father's name, or repair the Chronos Sentinel. She took the quill from Arthur and signed her names clearly under the clauses of the settlement, which guaranteed her protection and a pin money of £1,000 a year. Genevieve. Arthur signed his name with firm strokes and pressed his red wax seal, bearing the falcon of the House of Vance, onto the parchment. Arthur held up the sealed marriage settlement before the sheriff. "This legally binding marriage settlement contract is legally binding, witnessed by the butler of Ravenscroft. From this moment forth, she is the Duchess of Ravenscroft. Lord Percival's warrant is entirely void against the Duchess of Ravenscroft. You may return to my uncle and inform him that if he attempts to touch my wife again, I will raise this matter directly before the House of Lords." The sheriff stared in astonishment at the Duke's signature and the fresh red seal. He bowed low in apology and quickly ordered his constables to retreat into the winter blizzard. The hall fell silent, leaving Arthur and Genevieve standing opposite each other, fully aware that their lives were now legally bound in an alliance born of necessity, but sealed with absolute resolve. Chapter 5. The Ball of the Social Season. The London season began in earnest, sweeping the British aristocracy into a relentless whirl of grand balls and endless tea assemblies. Arthur escorted Genevieve to a royal ball hosted at a magnificent Mayfair townhouse. This was the first public appearance of the new Duchess of Ravenscroft before the critical eyes of the judgmental and gossip-hungry members of the Ton. The grand ballroom was resplendent under the brilliant light of thousands of crystal chandeliers, the melodies of a waltz rising from the orchestra. The couple's entrance immediately drew every curious gaze in the room. Whispers and rumors rippled through the clusters of noble ladies like a dark wave. "Look there. Is that the watchmaker's daughter whom Ravenscroft wed? It is an absolute scandal to the House of Vance to marry a low-born girl with not a single penny of dowry. Arthur must have been trapped by her. Before the ball commenced, Lord Percival had secretly bribed the ladies' maids in the dressing room, arranging for Genevieve to be given an old gown with a long tier along the hem, hoping to humiliate her before the judgmental and gossip-hungry members of the ton. However, Genevieve, utilizing her own artisan skills, had used lace borders and small brass pins to transform the tier into a unique, highly fashionable pleated design. She walked proudly beside Arthur, her hand resting lightly on his uninjured arm. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, draped in perfect pleats that accentuated her fair skin and golden hair. Though she wore no diamonds or pearls like the other ladies, she stood out by her grace, her steadfast eyes, and an air of quiet confidence that refused to bend under the scrutiny of the judgmental and gossip-hungry members of the ton. Lord Percival and the watchmaker Silas were also present as guests. They quickly approached the couple, Percival sneering with provocative arrogance as he spoke loudly. "Welcome, Arthur, and your watchmaker, Duchess. I hear you brought her to Ravenscroft to repair the Chronos Sentinel. It is laughable to think a poor girl from Cumbria could touch such a royal masterpiece. Silas here is the finest horologist in London, whom I commissioned for the estate, yet even he was baffled by its complexity." Silas, a man with a dark, sharp face, bowed with mock politeness, his eyes filled with disdain. "My greetings to your grace. I only fear that the coarse hands of Miss Sterling will only cause further damage to the royal timepiece. Such a machine is no toy for the untrained." Before Arthur could speak in defense of his wife, Genevieve took a step forward. She looked Silas directly in the eye, her voice clear, sharp, and cold. "Silas, I believe a true horologist would never use brute force to scratch the escapement pivots as I saw on the Chronos Sentinel. Your skills are perhaps suited for repairing cheap wall clocks at Cumbrian coaching inns, but not a royal masterpiece of historical significance. And if you wish to discuss celestial mechanics, I would be happy to point out the critical error in your calculation of the lunar phases on the astronomical clock you recently presented at the Royal Society. Your lack of precision is an insult to the craft." The surrounding guests turned their full attention to the exchange, the whispers dying down. Earl Evelyn, a renowned collector of antique clocks and an influential figure in Mayfair, stepped forward looking highly amused indeed. "Her Grace has a deep understanding of horology. I have been facing a great difficulty with my Swiss astrolabe clock." Genevieve conversed calmly with Earl Evelyn, sharing her knowledge of mechanics, astronomy, and the alignment of microgears using sapphire bearings to reduce friction. At that moment, Lady Jersey, one of the most powerful patronesses of the prestigious and highly exclusive Almack's assembly rooms, approached. She looked at Genevieve with sharp, calculating eyes before speaking with double meaning. "Duchess Ravenscroft, I hear you are highly skilled in the trade of watchmaking. Yet the judgmental and gossip-hungry members of the ton values ladies who excel in the fine arts rather than manual labor that stains the fingers with grease." Genevieve did not falter. She met the lady's gaze with a polite, sophisticated smile. "Lady Jersey, the great Galileo once said that mathematics and mechanics are the language with which the Creator wrote the universe. The art of horology is merely the simulation of that celestial heartbeat. I believe that understanding and preserving the heartbeat of time is no less noble than playing a sonnet or painting a canvas, for it requires a patient soul and a sharp intellect." Genevieve's brilliant response left Lady Jersey astonished and pleased. She nodded with a rare smile of approval, an excellent reply indeed. "You possess the soul of a true duchess, regardless of lineage." Her intelligence and grace won the admiration of Earl Evelyn, who exclaimed openly, "Though your lineage is not of the high peerage, your intellect surpasses us all. Arthur, you are indeed fortunate to have such an exceptional wife. The ton must change its view of her." Arthur stood beside her, his gray eyes filled with astonishment and a deep, rising pride. She had stood firm against the insults of his enemies and conquered the judgmental and gossip-hungry members of the ton by her own merit. A warm, unfamiliar feeling of pride settled in his chest. As the carriage rolled back to the estate, the silence between them was no longer cold but charged with an unspoken understanding. Genevieve looked out at the dark landscape, her heart beating fast. Arthur watched her profile in the shadows, realizing that this poor watchmaker's daughter had become more essential to his life, and his peace of mind, than any highborn lady of Mayfair could ever hope to be. The battle for Ravenscroft was far from over, but for the first time he felt he did not have to fight it alone. The cold winds of Cumbria howled outside, but inside the carriage a faint, tentative warmth was beginning to take root between two lonely souls. Chapter 6. A silent jealousy. Genevieve's brilliance at the London ball secured her the respect of several progressive nobles, but it also brought new complications. Earl Evelyn frequently sent letters discussing historical mechanics and even presented her with a rare antique Swiss microscope, to assist her in the repair of the Chronos Sentinel. One morning, Earl Evelyn paid an unexpected morning call to the drawing room of the Mayfair townhouse. He brought a collection of 17th-century clock pendulums for Genevieve to examine. Arthur, who had been managing estate affairs, returned immediately upon receiving the news. The atmosphere in the drawing room was incredibly tense. Arthur sat opposite Evelyn on a leather armchair, his face dark and devoid of any smile. He rested his ebony cane across his knees, his gray eyes locking onto every movement of the young Earl, who was speaking enthusiastically to Genevieve. "Your Grace, I believe only your exceptional hands can truly appreciate the beauty of this Swiss clock," Evelyn said with a charming smile, sliding the velvet box containing the clock toward her. Before Genevieve could touch it, Arthur utilized the tip of his cane to gently push the velvet box back. He spoke in a low, polite but freezing tone. "Earl Evelyn, the House of Ravenscroft appreciates your enthusiasm for horology. However, my wife is currently fully occupied with the restoration of the Chronos Sentinel. Your frequent calls and expensive gifts to a married lady seem to exceed the bounds of proper social etiquette. I suggest you maintain a proper distance." The lively conversation between Genevieve and Earl Evelyn regarding the structure of historical marine chronometers had echoed through the drawing room. Evelyn was a passionate collector, but he was entirely captivated by Genevieve's sharp analysis of reducing pivot friction using sapphire bearings. Arthur stood in the corner of the room, his face dark as a gathering storm. He felt a strange, fierce jealousy rising in his chest upon seeing his wife converse so easily with another gentleman, something she had never done with him. He clenched the handle of his cane, stepping forward to interrupt the conversation with a polite but threatening air. Evelyn paused, his smile turning stiff. He recognized the silent but highly dangerous jealousy of the Duke. He rose slowly, bowing. "I apologize if my curiosity has caused any inconvenience, Your Grace. I shall take my leave." Once Evelyn had departed, Genevieve turned to Arthur, her blue eyes flashing with anger. "Your Grace, you behave as though I have compromised your honor. My exchange with him was entirely professional. Do you not trust me?" Arthur rose, his posture rigid, his cold voice masking his internal conflict. "I trust you, Genevieve, but I do not trust the idle gentlemen of Mayfair. I do not wish to see my wife become the subject of gossip columns." He turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the spacious room. Genevieve felt deeply hurt and humiliated. She decided to go down to Arthur's private study to find the original design drawings of the Chronos Sentinel, which he had promised to locate. While searching through the drawers of his mahogany writing desk, her fingers brushed against an old, unsent letter wedged beneath a ledger. It was written to his family solicitor just before their marriage was signed. She opened it out of curiosity, and Arthur's sharp, decisive handwriting met her eyes. "The marriage with Sterling's daughter is merely a card to unlock the Chronos Sentinel. I have no time for personal feelings when Ravenscroft is in danger from Percival's greed. Once the late Duke's original will is recovered and the estate secured, I shall settle a generous sum upon her and arrange a quiet divorce to restore her freedom. She will want for nothing, and I shall retain Ravenscroft." Genevieve stood frozen in the dark study, the words piercing her heart like cold blades. All his public protection, his quiet tenderness, and his care, it was all a calculated performance to exploit her mechanical skills. She was merely a tool, a pawn to protect his title and estate. She recalled her father's warning: "The nobility look upon us only as replaceable gears. Never give them your trust." Tears rose in her eyes, hot against her pale cheeks, but she quickly brushed them away, her gaze turning cold and resolute. That night she moved all her belongings out of the master chambers, taking up residence in a dusty side chamber at the end of the west wing, locking the door and closing her heart to him entirely. She felt foolish for believing in his brief moments of warmth. The safety he had offered under the firelight, the protection against the constables, it was all to ensure the repairs went smoothly. She vowed to complete the restoration of the clock, to settle her debt, then leave without a single regret. She would prove to him that the honor of a Sterling could not be bought with gold or titles. She lay awake in the cold room, listening to the wind howling through the window, realizing that affection was the most dangerous illusion in the world of the peerage. She pulled the thin blanket closer to her shoulders, shivering from both the physical chill and the sudden emptiness in her chest. Tomorrow she would face the gears of the Chronos Sentinel with renewed focus, burying her feelings beneath the cold, logical laws of mechanics. She would not allow herself to be vulnerable again, for in the harsh world of the nobility, a single moment of weakness could lead to absolute ruin. Let Arthur keep his secrets and his coldness. She would keep her pride, even if it meant returning to the lonely life she had left behind. In the dark, silent West Tower, the ticking of her own thoughts was the only companion she had left, a cold reminder that in this castle of stone and secrets, she could only rely on herself. Chapter 7. The blizzard of the stronghold. A sudden, fierce winter blizzard swept across the cold and desolate highlands of Yorkshire and Cumbria, completely isolating Ravenscroft Castle from the outside world. The heavy snow blocked the entrances, and the wind howled through the stone battlements of the ancient fortress. The castle was enveloped in a freezing cold, the fires in the hearth struggling to warm the drafty stone chambers. Genevieve sat in the side chamber, trying to focus on repairing a small gear by the dim light of an oil lamp, when she heard a frantic knocking at her door. Mary, the young maid, stood outside, her face pale with terror. Her Grace. The Duke, his old Salamanca wound has flared up violently due to the freezing cold. He is burning with a high fever, delirious, and his shoulder is severely swollen. He has locked himself in his chamber and refuses to allow any servant inside. Mr. Brooks says if this continues, he may face gangrene or convulsions. Please, Her Grace, you must help him. Genevieve hesitated. Despite the pain and anger she felt after reading his letter, she could not leave him to suffer in such a state. Her heart told her she could not turn away from his pain. She quickly gathered her father's herbal medicines, preparing the warm oil of pine and lavender, and walked swiftly toward the master chambers. She used the butler's spare gold key to unlock the door. The master bedroom was cold and dark. Arthur lay on the grand oak bed, his face pale, his forehead covered in cold sweat, as he shivered beneath the heavy blankets. His injured shoulder flinched with every shallow breath. He was muttering in his delirium, speaking of Spanish battlefields, cannon fire, and her name. Genevieve, do not go. I did not use you. You are my only. Genevieve approached the bed, her heart tightening. She placed a cool, damp cloth on his forehead to reduce the fever. She poured the warm herbal oil onto her hands, rubbing them together until they were warm, then gently slid her hands beneath his linen shirt to massage his scarred shoulder and back. The skilled hands of the watchmaker found the exact tension points, soothing the cramped muscles and restoring circulation blocked by the cold. After several hours of constant care under the fading candlelight, Arthur slowly opened his gray eyes. The fever had begun to break, his gaze tired but clear. He saw Genevieve sitting beside the bed, her face showing signs of exhaustion, her blue eyes watching his shoulder with an undeniable concern. He spoke in a low, hoarse whisper. Genevieve, why are you here? I thought you despised me after finding that letter. Genevieve stopped her massage, standing up and maintaining a cold expression despite the warmth of the oil on her fingers. I am your watchmaker, Your Grace. My duty is to ensure you do not break down before the Chronos Sentinel is repaired. I have no wish to be accused of letting my husband perish before our contract is fulfilled. She turned to leave. Now that your fever has broken, I shall return to my quarters. During those hours of caring for him, Genevieve had fought a silent battle within herself. She looked at Arthur's face, now devoid of its usual cold detachment, appearing vulnerable and marked by pain. The battle scars on his shoulder told the story of a man who had sacrificed his youth for his country, only to return to the betrayal of his own kin. She realized he was only human, bearing deep Salamanca wounds just like herself. The cruel letter might have been written by the cynical, suspicious Arthur of the past, before he truly knew her. Her quiet tenderness rose, dissolving her resentment. She massaged his shoulder, feeling the warm pulse beneath his skin, her fingers moving with the precision of an artisan adjusting a delicate timepiece. Every touch brought a sense of warmth and security to Arthur, a feeling he had never experienced before. The scent of lavender and pine filled the dark room, dispelling the cold of the winter blizzard. Arthur gazed at her face under the candlelight, her long lashes, her lips parted slightly in concentration. He had never been treated with such sincere, uncalculated care. His regret and affection for her grew stronger. Arthur used the remaining strength of his uninjured arm to catch her wrist, his eyes filled with a sincere pain and regret. Genevieve, please listen to me. That letter, I wrote it before I truly knew you, before I realized what an exceptional woman you are. I was cynical, suspicious, betrayed by my own uncle, looking upon our marriage as a cold transaction to save Ravenscroft. But these past months, seeing your dignity before the judgmental and gossip-hungry members of the Ton, your intellect and your kindness to my servants, I have changed completely. I was a fool. I no longer look upon our marriage as a pawn game. I need you, Genevieve, not for the Chronos Sentinel but for yourself. Please, do not leave me. Seeing the deep sincerity and regret in his, Genevieve felt the ice in her heart begin to melt. She did not withdraw her hand, but she made no promises. She gently pulled the blanket over him, You must rest to regain your strength. Time will prove if your words carry more weight than that letter. Sleep, Arthur. But that night she remained by his bedside until the winter blizzard outside finally ceased. As she watched his chest rise and fall in steady sleep, Genevieve found herself tracing the faint scar on his cheek with her gaze. The fierce warrior who had survived the horrors of Spain looked strangely vulnerable in the dim embers of the hearth. She knew the dangers of trusting him. Yet the warmth of his confession lingered in the room, defying the icy wind outside. She resolved to be cautious, but as the first light of dawn broke over the snow-covered valleys of Cumbria, she knew her heart was no longer entirely her own. She would protect him, not just because of their marriage agreement, but because she had seen the true man beneath the scarred Duke's armor. And in that quiet resolution, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps their time together would not end in tragedy. Chapter 8. The 12th gear, the final deadline of the royal will, had arrived. That morning, the grand hall of Ravenscroft Castle was filled with a solemn, tense energy. The winter blizzard had ceased, replaced by the freezing cold characteristic of the Cumbrian winter. Lord Percival and the watchmaker Silas, accompanied by 2 royal judges and a group of solicitors representing the crown, entered the main hall with an air of absolute triumph. Percival sneered, holding the forged will sealed with red wax. Arthur, the 15-year limitation to find the original will has officially expired today. But the Chronos Sentinel remains as silent as a tomb. According to the entailment of the Vance family in this temporary will, the entire estate of Ravenscroft, the castle, and the ducal title belong to me from this hour. Gather your belongings and depart with your watchmaker girl. When Lord Percival's men attempted to ascend the West Tower to seal the clock and arrest Genevieve, they met an immovable wall of people. Mr. Brooks stood at the front, his face solemn, wearing his formal black livery. Beside him was Mrs. Potts, clutching a heavy rolling pin, and Mary along with the entire household staff. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a human barricade before the stairs. Brooks spoke coldly. Lord Percival, this tower is under the direct authority of the Duchess of Ravenscroft. Any person attempting to ascend without her Grace's explicit permission shall be treated as an illegal trespasser upon the Duke's property. The solidarity of the servants bought precious time for Genevieve. They stood firm, the cold air brushing their coats, but every face was marked by a fierce determination to protect the castle. Silas stepped forward, pointing at Genevieve, who stood silently beside Arthur. Your honors, I can prove this low-born watchmaker has deliberately sabotaged the gears of the Chronos Sentinel to delay the reading and exploit the Duke's support. She is entirely incompetent to repair such a complex royal machine. She is a fraud who must be expelled and imprisoned immediately. Arthur took a step forward, completely shielding Genevieve behind his broad shoulders. He looked coldly at Percival and the judges, his voice ringing through the hall. The timepiece is currently undergoing final maintenance. The deadline expires at exactly 12 o'clock noon today. It is now only 11:45. You have no legal authority to seize property or arrest anyone before the noon bell strikes. While the intense argument raged in the main hall, Genevieve quietly slipped back to the West Tower. She knew that every passing second was more precious than gold. Standing before the massive Chronos Sentinel, her hands moved with rapid precision, installing the 12th differential gear onto the main shaft. Perspiration beaded on her forehead, but her emerald green eyes remained filled with a quiet, resolute calm. She was racing against time to restore the heartbeat of the ancient castle. The senior royal judge adjusted his gold-rimmed spectacles, looking through the sealed documents and frowning. He turned to Silas, who stood with a smug expression, and asked, Silas, at what hour did you inspect the Chronos Sentinel? And can you state with absolute certainty that the machine has been permanently damaged by human hands? Silas nodded eagerly. Your Honor, I inspected it at 8 o'clock this morning. The escapement and the mainspring are completely rusted, and several gears have been crudely installed backward. This is a deliberate act of sabotage by Miss Sterling. Arthur let out a cold, mocking laugh that made Silas flinch. The judge, a solemn elderly man wearing the grey wig of the High Court, nodded. Indeed. Lord Percival, we must adhere strictly to the legal hour. We shall wait until exactly 12 o'clock noon. Percival sneered. Very well, I shall grant you these final 15 minutes to witness your ruin. Silas has inspected it. The clock is completely jammed due to her incompetence. No miracle will occur in 15 minutes. All your efforts are in vain. Genevieve stepped out from behind Arthur. She looked directly at Percival and Silas, her gaze cold and regal. Mechanics require no miracles or chance, Lord Percival. They only require absolute precision. which an incompetent fool like Silas will never comprehend. Mr. Silas, you claim I sabotaged the machine, yet do you know why you failed to make it run for 15 years? Because you were entirely ignorant of the 12th gear, the regulator wheel my father removed before he was murdered, to protect the late Duke's original will from thieves. She turned to Arthur, handing him her father's gold key. Arthur, come with me to the West Tower. It is time we restore Ravenscroft to its rightful owner. She walked with a proud, measured step before the astonished eyes of the nobility and the judges. Her posture was that of a true artisan preparing to expose a fraud. Silas followed behind, trembling, trying to find an opportunity to interfere, but Arthur's sharp gaze blocked his every move. The tension was palpable in the private and secured mechanical room, where the fate of the House of Vance hung in the balance. The judges and solicitors followed closely, preparing to witness the final resolution of the inheritance dispute of the House of Vance. The heavy oak doors of the West Tower creaked open, and the crowd stepped into the cold, dusty chamber. Silas was trembling, his eyes darting to the giant frame of the Chronos Sentinel, while Percival maintained a smug, superior grin. The tension in the air was so thick it was almost suffocating, with every eye fixed on the gold hands of the clock. Genevieve stood beside Arthur, her back straight and her expression unreadable, ready to face the final, crucial minutes that would decide the fate of the entire estate. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the cold metal of her father's gold key. This was the moment she had prepared for, the culmination of all her trials. She looked at the intricate gears of the clock, feeling a sudden surge of confidence. She would not let Silas or Percival steal her father's legacy, nor would she let them ruin the man who had stood by her in the storm. The final countdown had begun, and the fate of Ravenscroft Castle hung in the balance. Every gear in the Chronos Sentinel seemed to tick with a heavy weight, echoing the racing beats of her own heart, as the hand of the clock crept closer to the hour of noon. Chapter 9, The Chime of Recognition. It was 11:55. The private and secured mechanical room in the West Tower was crowded with onlookers. The tension was so thick that the rapid breathing of Lord Percival could be heard. The massive Chronos Sentinel stood silent, a giant of oak and brass. Genevieve stood on the wooden platform before the machine, her hands holding the 12th gear of solid gold, the wheel she had crafted to match her father's design. She carefully inserted the gear into the center pivot of the gear train. Her hands were perfectly steady, without a single tremor, though she knew that if she were off by even a tenth of an inch, the secure vial of chemical acid inside would shatter, releasing the liquid that would instantly oxidize the secret ink on the late Duke's original will, destroying the late Duke's legacy forever. She closed her eyes, listening to the silent rhythm of the gears, and tightened the final retaining screw with her pliers. She felt her heartbeat align with the silent movement of the ancient gears. She inserted her father's gold key into the central arbor of the dial, turning it 3 times counterclockwise. Click, tick-tock, a clear, resonant sound emerged from deep within the ancient mechanism. The massive gears began to rotate, the drive chains moving smoothly. The steady, powerful ticking broke the 15-year silence of the West Tower. The astronomical dials displaying the moon phases and the zodiac alignment began to turn, clicking into their correct positions for this very day. It was exactly 12 o'clock noon. Chime, chime, chime. The deep, resonant chimes of the Chronos Sentinel rang out, the sound traveling across the valley of Ravenscroft, signaling the revival of the ancient castle. The sound echoed like thunder through the stone tower. Mr. Brooks closed his eyes, tears running down his face after 15 years of silence. The voice of Ravenscroft had returned. Mrs. Potts and Mary wept with joy on the stairs, embracing each other. The royal judges and solicitors stood frozen in astonishment, marveling at the perfect operation of the massive clock. Silas backed away, his face pale, his tweezers dropping onto the stone floor with a sharp clang. He muttered, "Impossible, how could she do it?" Lord Percival stood dazed, his eyes red as he watched the cryptographic compartment slowly slide open, knowing his 15-year conspiracy had vanished. At the same time, a brass drawer at the base of the clock slid open with a loud click. Inside lay the original golden will of the late Duke, and a dossier detailing Lord Percival's embezzlement, and his conspiracy in the murder of Genevieve's father. All the documents had been written with a special ink, preserved by the secure atmosphere of the compartment, now revealed clearly under the daylight. Every scheme of Lord Percival was now laid bare before the law. Lord Percival looked at the genuine will, his face distorted with panic and rage. He knew he had lost his honor, his wealth, and faced the gallows for high treason. In a fit of madness, he drew a small dagger from his coat and lunged toward Genevieve on the platform. "You wretched girl, you have ruined me." "You shall die," Arthur reacted instantly. He stepped forward, using his uninjured arm to pull Genevieve securely into his chest, shielding her completely, while using his cane to strike Percival's hand, sending the dagger flying. He followed with a powerful kick to Percival's chest, sending him crashing to the floor. The guards immediately pinned Percival and Silas to the ground. Percival, pinned to the floor, screamed in humiliation, "Arthur! She is only a low-born watchmaker. She has no right to be the Duchess of Ravenscroft." Arthur looked down at him with cold disdain, holding Genevieve close before the judges and assembly, and declared in a powerful voice, "She has no need to prove her standing to anyone, for from this day forth, her standing is me. Anyone who insults the Duchess of Ravenscroft shall face the highest penalties of the law." The senior royal judge retrieved the golden will, reading it aloud to the room. "This will is fully valid under the royal seal. Arthur is the sole heir to the estate of Ravenscroft. Lord Percival and Silas are to be arrested immediately for forgery, embezzlement, and conspiracy in the murder of Master Artisan Sterling." Genevieve rested her head against Arthur's chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She knew that her father's clock had fulfilled its purpose, and her life had entered a new chapter, protected by the love and respect of the man beside her. Peace had finally returned to the West Tower. They stood together in the soft twilight, watching the shadows of the past dissolve into the quiet Cumbrian evening. The threat of Percival was gone, and the dark clouds that had hung over Ravenscroft for 15 years had finally dispersed. As the steady ticking of the restored clock echoed through the chamber, it sounded no longer like a threat, but like a promise of a new dawn. Together they had reclaimed their home, and together they would face whatever the future held. The servants downstairs were already preparing a feast to celebrate the victory, their laughter drifting up the spiral staircase. Genevieve smiled, feeling the warmth of Arthur's hand in hers. They had proven that truth and dignity could triumph over greed and corruption, and their bond, forged in the fires of adversity, was now unbreakable. The West Tower was no longer a symbol of exile, but the birthplace of their shared future. They had stood against the storm, and they had won. As she leaned into his embrace, Genevieve knew that whatever challenges London high society might present during the upcoming season, they would face them together, united by a love that was as precise and unbreakable as the finest clockwork. In the quiet warmth of Arthur's arms, the ticking of the castle clock was no longer a countdown to doom, but the beautiful rhythm of their new life. Chapter 10. The Queen of Gears. Lord Percival was imprisoned in London, his estates seized to compensate for the damages to the Vance property and the watch shop of Genevieve's family. Silas was permanently barred from the Horological Guild of England and exiled. Justice was fully served, clearing the name of Genevieve's father and restoring peace to the Cumbrian Valley. At the grandest ball of the London season, held at the prestigious and highly exclusive Almack's Assembly Rooms, the atmosphere was exceptionally lively. When Arthur and Genevieve entered the hall, the entire Mayfair aristocracy, including the ladies who had once whispered insults, fell silent and bowed deeply. Lady Jersey, the patroness of the prestigious and highly exclusive Almack's Assembly Rooms, personally welcomed them. "Welcome, Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft. It is an honor to receive the most intelligent and proud lady in England." Genevieve was stunning in a white silk gown, wearing the small diamond tiara of the House of Vance. She was no longer the poor watchmaker girl of Cumbria. She was the proud Duchess of Ravenscroft, who had secured her place through her own intellect and unwavering dignity. That night, on the stone terrace of Ravenscroft Castle, the Cumbrian fog had cleared, revealing a brilliant starry sky. Arthur approached Genevieve, presenting a small velvet box. Inside lay an exquisite gold pocket watch, its crystal cover revealing the tiny perfect gears ticking inside. Engraved on the cover was a falcon holding a gold gear with the inscription, "For Genevieve, the regulator of my time. I designed this watch myself and had the finest craftsman construct it for you," Arthur said softly, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "I know I was wrong when I wrote that cold letter, Genevieve. But my time from this day forth belongs to you. Will you be my true Duchess?" Returning from the prestigious and highly exclusive Almack's Assembly Rooms ball, the couple stood on the terrace of Ravenscroft Castle. The quiet night of the cold and desolate highlands of Yorkshire enveloped them, the stars shining like diamonds on black velvet. The chimes of the Chrono Sentinel echoed from the West Tower, signaling the revival of the ancient castle. Genevieve looked out over the valley, feeling a deep peace. She no longer had to run or fear the future. She had found her home, surrounded by loyal friends and a husband willing to defend her before the entire world. Genevieve accepted the watch, feeling its warm ticking in her hand. She looked into his eyes and smiled a smile that warmed the cold air of Cumbria. Time will prove all things. Arthur, and our watch has begun to run. I trust in your gears and in your heart. Arthur looked at her with love and respect, his voice low and warm. Genevieve, when the season ends, I want to rebuild your father's shop in Cumbria. And we shall establish a mechanical academy in London for poor children with talent who lack the opportunity to learn. I want the wealth of Ravenscroft to support true merit, just as you have shown. You shall direct it, my Duchess. Genevieve was deeply moved seeing the complete transformation of the cold man before her. He had given her not only social standing, but recognition and honor for her dreams and talent. She embraced him, resting her head on his shoulder under the starry sky, feeling the warmth of his love. He leaned down, placing a tender kiss upon her lips under the witness of the stars and the steady ticking of the Chronos Sentinel from the West Tower, beginning a new chapter of happiness and mutual respect. The wind from Cumbria blew across the estate, but it was no longer cold, carrying only the warmth of a love built on understanding. The gold watch in her hand ticked steadily, recording every precious moment of their lives. A time that belonged entirely to each other, a destiny perfectly aligned and bound together. She knew that from this day forth, every beat of time would be a testament to their enduring love, a beautiful harmony between mechanical gears and the beat of a heart. As the guests in the ballroom below continued to celebrate the union of the Duke and his new Duchess, Arthur led Genevieve onto the stone battlements. Below them, Cumbria lay peaceful and vast, illuminated by a crescent moon. He took her hand, the very hands that had rebuilt his family's legacy, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. You have regulated my time, Genevieve, he murmured, his gray eyes shining with a deep, quiet devotion. And you have given this ancient fortress a soul, she smiled, looking out at the endless sea, ready to embark on a long journey of love and shared purpose, knowing that their time together would be as eternal as the stars above. The challenges of the future would come, but with their hearts aligned like the perfect gears of the Chronos Sentinel, they were ready for whatever destiny had in store. They were no longer two solitary figures fighting the cold, but a united force, their lives ticking in perfect, beautiful harmony. The stars above Cumbria shone with a brilliant, steady light, reflecting the promise of their new beginning. As they looked out over the vast moors, Arthur held her hand, feeling the quiet strength of his Duchess. They had overcome the greed of Percival, the betrayal of Silas, and the prejudices of the Tun. Now they stood at the threshold of a new era for Ravenscroft, ready to build an academy of science and watchmaking that would help poor, talented children across England. Their legacy would not be written in stone, but in the lives of those they helped, and in the enduring strength of a love that had stood the test of time. Hand in hand, they stepped back into the warmth of the castle, ready to face the dawn of their shared life. For they knew that, as long as their hearts beat in unison, no storm could ever dim the light of their love, and every ticking second would bring them closer together.